Hi, my name is Gareth Russell and I'm the Managing Director of Jersey Road PR. As a PR agency, we tell the story of Christian organisations and churches through the media. And it's storytelling that I want to talk to you about over the next 15 minutes or so. Some of you may have already switched off. You may be asking yourself, why should I invest my time listening to a Scotsman talking about stories? Well, the reason I believe this is important is because I think if the church were to equip itself to be more effective in storytelling, we would be more effective in kingdom building. Stories impact us in ways that well-crafted arguments just can't. If you look at a Netflix documentary, there is documentary after documentary of real lives being impacted by crime or injustice or prejudice. When you listen to an interview on the radio or TV that really grabs you and pulls you in, it's more often than not because there's a deep sense of connection with the interviewee's story. And when you can't put a good book down, it's the empathy or the tragedy or the inspiration of the story that absorbs you and oftentimes transports you. Tahir Shah in Arabian Nights says that stories are the communal currency of humanity. Stories bond us. They break down walls of division, they personalize complex issues, and they can go some way to challenging prejudice and uniting communities. But more than that, our story as Christians and our story as the church can be a story that brings hope to those who live in fear. The power of shared experience can take someone from feeling isolated, ashamed, alone, hopeless, to feeling seen and valued and loved. So how can we be more effective in telling our story to help those who need hope get it? Well, first we need to be confident in our story. I think the church has lost its mojo a little in how it shares its story, and I can understand why. We're living in a postmodern, post-Christian, secular world. We are the outliers. What we believe is countercultural, and sharing what we believe risks ostracizing ourselves. But here's the thing. Postmodernist secularism and rampant individualism has failed. Just because that's the culture we live in doesn't mean it works. You know, people are twice as likely now to say that they are lonely than they were 10 years ago. And they're also twice as likely now than 10 years ago to say they're open to spirituality. Society is waking up to the reality that the pursuit of stuff provides no meaning, and the elevation of self above all others is ultimately futile. The world is crying out for something different, for something purposeful, for something that speaks to our spiritual identity as much as our social identity. And church, we have the truth. We have what they are looking for. But there's a confidence issue in telling our story. Maybe we're still wrestling with the fundamentals of our faith personally. Or maybe we're fearful for how raising our head above the parapet may impact our social equity with those in our communities. Or maybe we're unsure of how to tell that story in a way that means something to those we are communicating with. There are many reasons we may have lost our confidence. But a church with a confidence in the story it tells is the only way the world will find true meaning, real purpose, and their own living relationship with God. In a post-truth world, the truth is more important than ever. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this will be easy. We're living in Babylon. We need to be nuanced in the way we communicate effectively, in a way that we share and that will be understood. But we need that message to be confident, knowing that our purpose is to bring God's love to those around us. So our story must be confident. But secondly, our story must be authentic. The church has often been accused of being hypocritical, of preaching one thing and doing another. And there is a lot of truth in that. We have built platforms from unrealistic expectations of those in positions of authority. And we have not always allowed them the ability or the grace to fail. The message has been focused heavily on the need for individuals to be saved without the nuance of the struggles that we ourselves have faced and continue to face. My own story is a good example. You know, in my life, I've gone through some good times and some really not so good times. My parents both passed away within 6 months of each other when I was in my early 20s. My wife and I at one stage had a miscarriage and then struggled to get pregnant for 10 years. I myself have been addicted to pornography, and at times I've drunk alcohol too much. These experiences are all part of my story. They are things that I have done that have brought me much shame, and there are things that I've done that have questioned whether God's promise to me was real. There are times when I've wondered how I might even defeat some of these inner demons. And as a church, we need to be more deliberate about embracing the authenticity of our stories. We need to accept that each of us are imperfect, fallen human beings, and that the hope and certainty we have in Jesus is absolutely nothing to do with our own abilities or discipline or acts of kindness, but absolutely everything to do with Jesus and what he did for us on the cross. As a church, we need to accept the stories that have not resolved themselves yet, that haven't quite reached a happy ending, but are still on the journey. Because when we say, me too, when we share our struggles and our fears and our failings and our insecurities, that is when we create an environment through which our stories can unleash a power that speaks to the grace and forgiveness and mercy that we have been given, and the authority, purpose, and the continued grace in which we now live. So we need a church with a confident story. We need a church with an authentic story. And thirdly, we need a church with a simple story. Jesus was the ultimate communicator. As a PR agency, we have learned a great deal about how best to engage the media by studying the person of Jesus and identifying how he chose to communicate. What strikes me more than anything else was the simplicity of Jesus' storytelling. Two of the main themes of Jesus' teaching was his and our relationship with the Father and the nature of the kingdom of heaven. Obviously, he spoke about many things, but when you look at it, those things were often focused on those two areas. And I think over the past few hundred years, we've probably complicated the story. You know, when we are training clients for media interviews, we tell them to prepare 3 key messages and to stick to those key messages as much as they are able. Why do we do that? We do it because when you stick to your key messages, it allows you to be consistent. It means the message is clear, and it ensures that the story is compelling. You know, accusations of the church being divided and hypocritical often come when we overcomplicate and show a display or a lack of consistency. Accusations of the church having questionable motives when speaking in social or political issues could be overcome if we were to be more deliberate about ensuring that when we spoke with clarity in our message and in the language that we use. Accusations of the church being out of touch and are often rooted in the fact that we haven't spent time asking those outside the church where their real felt needs are and what their hopes and fears are and what they are searching for. If we knew those things, our stories could speak more directly to the needs and hopes and fears and produce a more compelling story. Something I love to do is read a bedtime story to my daughter. She's 2 this month, and what I've noticed is that there are some books she prefers I read to her before she goes to sleep. Those books have characters that she engages with. They have content that provides some meaning, and they have a conclusion that lifts her perspective. Jesus was a master storyteller, but each story had a purpose. He wasn't a first century Netflix putting on a show to help his audience pass the time. His stories pointed to something greater, to a fulfillment of messianic prophecies, to a promise of the coming kingdom. And he's given us the authority to tell that same story. We are now the storytellers. It's our stories that speak prophetically into the culture of a nation. It's our story that can point to the kingdom and the promise of the now and the not yet. It's our story that can encourage others to look to God for the power to break strongholds in their life. And it's our story that can ultimately communicate in a clear, consistent, and compelling way that we all have access to a life-giving, fear-destroying, hope-filled, and eternal relationship with God that will allow us to fulfill the potential that he sees in us and bring salvation to each person who hears and believes. I think the church should regain its confidence, embrace authenticity, and commit to simplicity. Insecurity and fear are not a modern phenomena. They have been around for centuries, but we need to be strong and courageous. One of my favorite passages in the Bible is Joshua 1, when Joshua is taking on the mantle of leading the people of Israel from Moses as they entered the promised land. And in this first chapter, God speaks directly to the fears that were no doubt overwhelming Joshua. And in verse 6, we read this, God saying to Joshua, "Be strong and courageous, because you're going to lead these people to inherit the land that I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Don't turn from it to the right or left, that you may be successful where you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." My prayer for each of you watching this is that we would be strong and courageous as we tell our story, that we would root it in the Word of God, and that we would do so in the knowledge that God is with us wherever we go.